Thank all of you for making time to come here and to choose this feature session today. We're really grateful. Also, I'd like to express my gratitude to ISDR for providing this opportunity for UNESCO and others to jointly organize this session on an unusual theme, I guess, for this audience, heritage and resilience. The purpose is really to sort of start a reflection on the relationship between these two dimensions, heritage, cultural heritage, and natural heritage, both tangible and intangible, and the issue of how to reduce disaster risks and build resilience. I wasn't prepared to make an introductory statement, but I suggest I'll go straight to my own presentation, if that's okay with Emily. And I'd like to ask our colleagues, the computers, to put my PowerPoint on the screen, if you don't mind, which is not this one. Everything has been mixed a little bit. It's the one from UNESCO. Anyway, I am from UNESCO World Heritage Center, but I'll be speaking also on behalf of two other partner organizations, which are the International Council of Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS, and the International Center for the Study and Preservation of Cultural Properties, which is ICCROM. Later I'll tell you more about them. We have together prepared this publication, which you may have in your hands, with the ISDR support and also Marsh International, which summarizes what I'm going to tell you now. So first thing, heritage is a very important thing, of course, as we all know. We usually identify it with iconic buildings, landmark monuments, places that attract millions of visitors and that act as a focus, a beacon for values and identity and sense of belonging throughout the world. But there is also another, perhaps less understood dimension of heritage, which is more perhaps related to our everyday life and the interaction between heritage and the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. Heritage is the result of this long interaction between humans and their environment. And for this reason, knowledge that come from traditions and practices that are associated to our heritage are inherently sustainable, and they sort of express the resilience of communities long before the word resilience was even invented. In fact, studies have shown recently how cultural and natural heritage contribute significantly to sustainable development as defined by the UN, for example, inclusive social and economic development, environmental sustainability, as well as peace and security. Okay, so heritage is crucially important for our lives and needs to be protected. However, that's my second point, heritage is increasingly at risk from disasters and climate change. Here, I don't have a lot of time. They gave me 5 minutes to make this presentation, so I had to choose from dozens of terrifying pictures. I've picked up some of the most recent events, a flood that affected for over a month the historic capital of Thailand, Ayutthaya, an earthquake that destroyed the most important church in Haiti, of course, some years ago, as you all know. A fire, by the way, set by an arsonist, which destroyed completely the most important historic building in Korea, South Korea, in Seoul. This is the Southern Gate. And of course, I could have continued. In addition to this disaster risks that are affecting heritage, there is another aspect that I believe our co-panelist, Mrs. Yasmin Lari, will dwell on later on. There is another aspect which is often neglected. It's the additional threat to heritage from post-disaster reconstruction that is culturally insensitive and that does not consider heritage and the also cultural intangible aspects that are associated with the social fabric of a community. Lots of historic buildings are demolished after a disaster, although they could still be repaired. And now the next point. There is an additional very good reason for protecting heritage, in addition to its, of course, intrinsic, historic, symbolic, scientific values. And this is that heritage sites, and also in traditional knowledge associated to their care, they can strengthen resilience and reduce disaster risks. How does that happen, you may wonder? Well, there are two ways. One is through tangible, physical, I would say, goods and services that heritage provide. For example, a cultural landscape like the rice terraces of the Philippines, here shown in the slide, which is a World Heritage Property. When it is well maintained, it protects local communities living down the valleys from the risk of landslides and floods, of course, in addition to providing them with essential livelihood. Another interesting example is traditional technologies of construction, exemplified by this building on the right side of the slide, which managed to stand a powerful earthquake, whereas at the same time, a building in reinforced concrete, somewhat so-called more advanced technology, collapsed entirely only a few hundred meters away under the same sort of seismic event. But there is also another very important dimension through which heritage contributes to building resilience and reducing disaster risks. And here I'd like to use this slide, which shows the city of L'Aquila in Italy, which was affected, as some of you might know, by an earthquake some years ago. As a result, the historic city center was emptied. A red zone was created where people could not go. The government decided to invest in rebuilding new towns some 15 kilometers away from the city. And so people were physically separated from their historic city. And after a while, they started to protest, and these people basically forced a block, and despite the police trying to prevent them, entered the main square of the city. And they are here expressing their anger and despair at this forced separation, because of course for any individuals, this place represents the context which is associated to shared histories, values, events that binds them together as a community. And so it is crucial for them to take the city back, as the sign says in Italian. Another aspect is exemplified by this picture that shows the Mostar Bridge in Bosnia-Herzegovina. As you know, a civil war caused extensive losses and damage to the city, including the destruction of the bridge. There were two communities fighting each other across the river. After the war, UNESCO sponsored the reconstruction of the bridge involving the two communities, and this helped bringing the two communities together through a process of mutual recognition of the cultural differences, and this helped building peace and reconciliation. Today, the site is inscribed on the World Heritage List, and people come to see the bridge, which brings, of course, a lot of economic revenues to the inhabitants, but also pride and a common sense of shared identity. And that's heritage. The next point is that UNESCO, IUCN, ICOMOS, ICROM, and many others have built now a considerable amount of knowledge and experience over the years in this area of work. Manuals, case studies, climate change, awareness-raising activities targeting the youth, training courses that we organize, field projects in places such as Haiti, or this is Petra in Jordan, and of course there are many, many others. The fact remains, however, that generally heritage sites are not well prepared to face disasters. There is a lack of awareness among heritage agencies that are responsible for their care. The risks from disasters are completely underestimated, and at the same time, in parallel, the disaster risk sector does not sufficiently take heritage into account as an important issue. And this is really the reason why we wanted to organize this session, to talk to you as a community of disaster risk sort of practitioners. So my last slide basically lists the suggestions we have, which we have included in this publication here. for steps that can be taken to put heritage at the heart of disaster risk reduction policies with a view to, of course, the next paradigm of disaster risk reduction that will be into the Hyogo Framework for Action 2, as it is called in the jargon. I'm off, my time is off, but I'll be happy to provide any other information with my colleagues in case you have questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Giovanni. Right, let's just take this moment to welcome the Mayor of Byblos to the proceedings, Mr. Ziad Hawat. We'll let him have a few words just to introduce himself and so forth. We're so glad you're here. And I will also quickly explain the format of the rest of the session. Each presenter is going to make a short presentation. I will ask a couple of questions. We will then have questions from the floor. I will summarize everything, and then we'll have a summary for further closing remarks from the chairman. So, Mr. Hawat.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for my small delay. I just arrived from Lebanon. Cultural heritage sites are considered major engine for economic opportunities, education, social and cultural life. The mission will effectively engage various stakeholders at the national and regional levels for protecting major Lebanese cultural heritage in historic areas during such catastrophic situation in the future by exploring adaptation policies and plans at the national and local level. This would set forth measures towards protecting cultural heritage for present and future generations. The European countries have a long history for preserving their cultural heritage since antiquity. The Europeans' first initiative for cultural heritage started in 1974. In 1993, European treaty cultural heritage was treated as a priority. Today, Lebanon has much to learn from Europeans' experience and role models in preserving its own cultural heritage sites. Byblos, as a local government, is finding support through partnerships with other local governments. The city of Venice and Byblos, both of each include UNESCO World Heritage Site and both signatories to UNISDR's Making City Resilient campaign. My city is getting ready, have joined force through a city-to-city exchange initiative. We were both concerned about the threat of inundation from storm surge and other risks. We agreed to initiate a twin project in June 2011, which began by bringing together experts from Venice and representatives of the Lebanese government and the municipality of Byblos. Together, we have been exploring issues related to implementing an approach for the protection of the ancient harbor of Byblos and import marine, and adjoining archaeological sites with Phoenician, Roman, and medieval remains. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come back with questions in a little while. In the meantime, I'd like to welcome Professor Giorgio Orsini of Venice, who's one of the world's foremost champions of heritage protection.
Good morning, authorities, dear colleagues. I'm honored to be with you today. In our society, the spreading of the culture contributes to democracy and freedom. This is why many dictatorships were against culture. However, culture is delicate too. It can be damaged and even lost with severe consequences for the society. As Francisco Goya said in 1799, the sleep of the reason produces monsters. Cultural heritage relates also to human rights. The Council of Europe Framework Convention on the Value of the Cultural Heritage for Society declares that everyone, alone or collectively, has the right to benefit from the cultural heritage and to contribute towards its enrichment. In Italy, the safeguard of the landscape and the historical and artistic patrimony of the nations is affirmed in the Constitution, the fundamental law of the Republic. Let me underline this: present and future patrimony, not only past heritage. Along the history, the cultural patrimony was always essential for economic development of Italian regions and cities. This aspect has become even more important in this time of crisis and is a key factor for an exit strategy. In this sense, any severe damage to our cultural heritage would subtract crucial resources to the economic growth and to the social welfare of our communities. Its preservation is therefore the base for any further innovation and progress. I wish to show you the picture of the collapse of the original San Marcos bell tower in 1902. A symbol of the city was destroyed. The shock was immense, and it was the seed to rebuild the tower exactly as it was. The new tower was inaugurated in 1912. In the recent years, the foundation began to show some signs of failure. A series of consolidation measures have been implemented to remedy this situation, also by means of rings made of bars of super steel titanium. Preventive maintenance, even if expensive, costs less than reconstruction. A proper maintenance of historical centers of cities is fundamental also for coping to the needs of social cohesion, livability of territories and their economic development. A well-maintained and living historic environment is a key factor to strengthen the resilience of a community, especially in front of the big challenges due to the global changes. We have to say it loudly. Cities cannot fight alone against climate changes and major natural hazards. The present economic crisis cannot be an excuse for abandoning the support to the urban cultural heritage maintenance. The cooperation between cities and national government is essential. Through the centuries, Venice developed a singular capacity to defend itself to the impacts of natural hazards. Today, all the national community is spending huge efforts not only to protect the city against the flooding, but also in a wider plan of restoration, maintenance, social revitalization. In fact, an holistic and systemic approach is needed and must be supported by interdisciplinary good science. In 2012, the city of Venice and UNISDR Europe organized a conference on protecting cultural heritage and adapting to climate change, presented in the book distributed. In my activity, European champion in various meetings with other mayors, it is quite an easy task to convince my colleagues how important it is to include protection of cultural heritage in any DRR strategy. Usually, the mayors know very well the values of their territories. Best practice sharing and twinning are useful tools for putting in practice this aim. More difficult sometimes is to convince the national authorities to provide the needed support. Please, let me tell you that we have the duty to insist at any level. It is necessary and convenient to safeguard the cultural heritage because, as Dostoevsky wrote, beauty will save the world. I'm convinced of that, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Orsini. I think that provides an excellent example of exactly why Venice is at the forefront of this protection of heritage resilience. One question we do have is, as heritage is so vital to economic development and the sustainability of a city, do you have any words of advice for citizen engagement and participation within projects to make them understand and help them participate in their own resilience of business and as individuals?
Sì, sì, in italiano. I will translate in English.
Io credo che il coinvolgimento dei cittadini sia una cosa molto importante.
Citizen engagement is very, very important thing.
Nel nostro statuto della municipalità, del comune, abbiamo varie forme di coinvolgimento e partecipazione dei cittadini alle scelte importanti della città.
In our statute of the municipality, there are many foreseen many way of participation and involvement of citizens in the most important decision made by the city.
Anche per quanto riguarda il grosso lavoro del MOSE di difesa dalle acque alte, c'è stata all'inizio una scarsa comunicazione e questo ha creato molti problemi.
Also for the major defense against flooding, the MOSE project at the beginning, the early beginning was some lack of communication with citizens, and this created a number of problems.
Un lavoro che poteva sembrare come dire, facilmente comprensibile da tutti, a un certo punto è stato motivo di divisione.
Also in that case, even in a moment where for something which should have been easier to communicate and to share, for this lack of communication became an item of division.
Quindi io credo che sia fondamentale che i vari livelli di autorità nazionali e locali riescano a collaborare assieme, coinvolgendo anche le popolazioni preventivamente.
So that's why I believe that at the different level of administration, at the national and the local level, should be able to cooperate since the beginning, involving the citizen, in order to avoid any problem and to involve completely the community.
It's about listening as well as telling, isn't it? Thank you so much. Right, I think part of the what's so exciting about this session is the demonstration of political commitment to the issue. We have two mayors, and we now have our next speaker as well, who is Mr. Dorji, who is the governor of Thimphu in Bhutan. Can I ask you please to speak directly into the microphone as well, so that everyone can hear at the back? Thank you. You have to be very close to the microphone.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dorji. I'm the governor of Thimphu, the capital city of Bhutan. And I would like to thank the organizers for the timely meeting of the Global Forum Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction and express my appreciation on behalf of the Department of Disaster Management and the Department of Culture of the Ministry of Home and Cultural Affairs, the Royal Government of Bhutan, for the opportunity offered to me and my colleagues to participate in this fourth global platform on disaster risk reduction. As a starter, for those of you who are not very familiar with Bhutan, it's a very small country in the Himalayas, landlocked between the very big giants like China and India, with a population of around 700,000 people, and pursuing a very alternative development paradigm called the gross national happiness. Now, for a small country which is totally traditional, has a traditional social base, there is no question about the importance of cultural values and institutions and heritage, because those aspects of the society are anchors of society itself. And for Bhutan, heritage and culture had been synonymous with our existence right from ancient times. But lately, we have experienced natural hazards. We are very vulnerable to natural hazards because we are located in a very mountainous region. We are susceptible to earthquakes, fire, glacial lake outburst floods, landslides, and flooding itself. And those natural hazards have brought to the surface the need for building resilience and disaster risk reduction. For a country like Bhutan to thrive and grow, we cannot do without reducing risk, disaster risk reduction. And that is why in my slide here, I have shown a statue, the first slide, statues in the temple. And that is just to show that the heritage and culture forms a very important part of Bhutan. And then the second picture down there is shows the glacial lake outburst flood, which comes with no warning, which happened in the old capital city of Punakha. And we had to really strive very hard to save the structure down there. And from all, until 5 years ago, disaster risk reduction and disaster management was a very new subject to Bhutan, because it never struck us that disaster would gain so much of, popularity at the international stage. Just 5 years ago, in 3 years ago, in 2010, we had our first international conference on disaster management. And that conference was very, very important for Bhutan, because as you can see here, the two above pictures are of temples and heritage sites which were destroyed by earthquake in 2011, and the fire which you see down in the last two slides below occurred in 2012 to a very, very important fortress built in 1643. These damages and destructions caused by natural disasters have made it very imperative for Bhutan to come up with a plan to reduce risk and to build resilience. And for that, the conference came up with a document called the Thimphu document, which was formulated and drafted by 53 experts from 23 international agencies and countries, and around 100 people from Bhutan itself. And the action plan drafted covered certain very important things that we have not really comprehended. So the policy, that was, I think, the first the very important aspect of disaster management, because there has to be a policy and there has to be institutions to respond and to coordinate. So therefore, we have now passed the Disaster Management Act in February this year. And then we will soon be we are in the process of formulating the bylaws, the rules and regulations of implementing that act. This act also takes into account technical aspects of disaster risk reduction and building resilience, and then the post-recovery of cultural heritage, and traditional, and most important, it incorporates the traditional practices of disaster risk reduction and involvement of communities in disaster risk reduction. And of course, capacity building and all that, that is the thing. So, as a small country, as a small and landlocked country, it has become very, very difficult for Bhutan not to pay attention to strategies and methods to prevent disasters and to reduce the risk. Because I think for those of you who are in the room here, it need not be stressed that disaster not only pertains to collapsing buildings and other things, but there are so many aspects to disaster which can affect both the political scenario, the economic scenario, and the cultural and social fabric of society, which is happening in so many countries these days. So for those of our message from this forum, I hope, will reach people outside this room, people very important, and people who can play vital roles in taking the disaster risk reduction and building resilience efforts to a higher level. And then our expectation as a small country from many of the big players, big businesses, big countries, countries with resources, countries with power, will pay attention to pleas and petitions from small countries like Bhutan, so that this risk can be reduced, and then resilience can be built into the societies. Of course, natural calamities and natural disasters cannot be prevented. They occur naturally. But then I think we can reduce the risk of these natural events if we are prepared, and if we have planned, and if we have the resources to mitigate them. So this is my presentation here, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer after the session. But my message to this forum and to the general, to the international forum is that we need to pay greater attention to disaster risk reduction and building resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think it very neatly encapsulated many of the common themes that are running throughout this, in terms of basically it is always cheaper to prevent than to reconstruct. Also, I think it is interesting in citizen engagement that you have no choice but to do pay attention to the traditional disaster management practices and incorporate those within. I would have one question. you said that you would appeal to the wider world and larger nations, larger organizations and so forth. What do you see as the role of the private sector in assisting you in this?
That was on my mind. Of course, I think the private sector and big businesses, private sector should play a very important role, because I think in any kind of business or any kind of activity, the private sector, at least in my country, private sector are more efficient, more, I think, more responsive, if they are prepared to invest, if they are prepared to take up the challenge. But sadly, it is very difficult to persuade the private sector, because in investing in building resilience and investing in disaster risk reduction, because it involves spending money. And then not many are prepared to spend money on something that may not happen in 100 years, or which really doesn't provide tangible profit and loss accounts. So it is a challenge for us to persuade the private sector to take up disaster risk reduction and resilience building activities because of that. But I think it is catching up. The only consolation is that through forums like this, and through the efforts of the many countries and many very dedicated environmentalists and disaster practitioners, I think the message is reaching them very fast. And then hopefully that, in a couple of years, the private sector would come to the forefront of taking up disaster risk reduction and building resilience. Because I think more than anybody, ultimately, it can reflect in their profit and loss accounts, how disasters can play into that.
Thank you very much. This leads us on nicely to Ambassador Jean Musiteli of the Government of France, who's going to outline some very interesting initiatives that are being undertaken there. So you have to say.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Madam.
Listen my speech in English, please. You can take this, I think. Okay.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having invited France to participate in this important meeting, the fourth platform. For 5 years, I was the ambassador to UNESCO, and I addressed this issue of heritage. The relationship between men and nature has always been complicated. Mankind has always wanted to domesticate the forces of nature, yet at the same time has always felt powerless when facing such unpredictable events as those we experienced in 1962. Claude Lévi-Strauss said this, and he said that man has cut himself off from nature and considered himself to be a sovereign. He has refused to realize that he was a living being and given free rein to a lot of misconceptions. We have to strive for an equitable balance between man and nature. This is vital, not only because of the natural risks and the hazards and catastrophes, but because of the impact of climate change. All of these changes, as has been shown, has affected the heritage, which is cultural and immaterial, and has opened it up to greater risk. And that is why we have to come up with a prevention and management strategy built with the idea of sustainable development in mind, and keep the idea of heritage close to our hearts. As has already been said, we have to protect cultural heritage and to use it as as a leverage for action. We note that our cultural heritage, when we maintain it well and respect traditions, according to local usage, resist disasters better. When disasters do occur, we see that the values involved in cultural heritage help the population to maintain their identity and to rebuild their history and to recover more rapidly. We have seen many examples recently, and I think they have been portrayed here today. We've heard about Kashmir and Sichuan and others. On every occasion, we've seen the traditional buildings built with local materials. According to the local traditions, withstand the shock better than those built in reinforced cement. There's also a symbolic content to using traditional measures, and I'd like to tell you about France's experience. We have restored a painting that was of the Sermon of the Ancestors, a Haitian tradition, and the population was able to recover its sense of pride in its heritage.
Il ne faut donc pas regarder le patrimoine uniquement comme un bien menacé à protéger, mais aussi en renversant un peu la perspective comme une ressource à mobiliser et à intégrer dans la stratégie de réduction des risques naturels. Je crois que nous sommes tous d'accord sur ce constat, ça a été dit par tous mes prédécesseurs. Ce qu'il faut maintenant, c'est avoir la volonté politique d'intégrer le patrimoine dans la stratégie de réduction des risques naturels. Plusieurs initiatives ont déjà été
Many actions have already been taken, and here I'm thinking about the Venice Declaration, and I would like to pay tribute to the mayor here, who is with us.
La France, pour sa part, est tout à fait disposée à mettre au service de cet objectif son expertise nationale et l'expérience qu'elle retire de ses interventions dans les situations de catastrophe. Nous avons chez nous un savoir-faire patrimonial ancien, une expertise scientifique forte, des institutions éprouvées face aux catastrophes. Et la France, je vous le rappelle, est aussi présente dans des régions telles que l'océan Indien, le Pacifique, les Caraïbes, régions exposées à toutes sortes de phénomènes volcaniques et cycloniques, et par là peut très bien mener des actions de coopération rapprochée. Donc ce qu'il faut aujourd'hui, c'est sur la base d'un certain nombre de principes, construire une gouvernance internationale de la gestion des risques naturels. Sur un certain nombre de principes que je rappelle, mais qui ont déjà été exprimés, à savoir l'implication des populations concernées, et le renforcement de leur capacité et de leurs compétences, ou encore le fait de ne pas se baser uniquement sur l'ingénierie industrielle et standardisée, mais de faire appel aux techniques et matériaux traditionnels. L'accent doit également être mis, et c'est très important, sur la sensibilisation, la formation et surtout la transmission de la mémoire patrimoniale. L'amnésie de nos sociétés est la meilleure alliée des catastrophes naturelles. Nous disposons enfin de toute une série d'outils technologiques et il n'est qu'à se promener dans le hall de cette réunion pour en avoir une idée, qui permettent de mieux répertorier les biens culturels exposés et de faire connaître et de diffuser plus largement la connaissance nécessaire. Il s'agit donc aujourd'hui, et je crois que c'est la tâche des organisations internationales, l'UNESCO fait bien son travail dans la matière. Il s'agit de construire cette gouvernance internationale, c'est-à-dire d'avoir à la fois un corps de principes, une méthodologie opérationnelle et un dispositif institutionnel. En effet, nous voyons bien que des initiatives, il en fleurit partout, au niveau national, au niveau des organisations internationales. Mais ce qui manque aujourd'hui le plus, c'est de la coordination, c'est de la concertation, c'est une analyse systématique des retours d'expériences en particulier qui permettent d'avoir une action plus efficace en matière de prévention. Je termine en disant que le patrimoine, ce n'est pas seulement un trésor artistique, c'est un condensé d'intelligence pratique, d'adaptation au milieu naturel, aux besoins et aux ressources des populations locales. Sachons donc en tirer toutes les opportunités qu'il offre pour réduire
la vulnérabilité
we
des
must
populations aux
work in
catastrophes
this area
et pour alléger leurs souffrances lorsque ces
relieve the
catastrophes ont eu lieu.
population's
Je voudrais
suffering.
d'ailleurs exprimer à cette occasion une pensée pour les
And
victimes de
here I'd like
la
to
catastrophe naturelle
convey my
d'Oklahoma
thoughts
City, qui montre
to
bien à quel
the
point nous sommes en
population
plein
of
dans
Oklahoma
l'actualité.
City.
Voilà le défi qui se présente à nous
This
aujourd'hui.
event
La
shows
France
how
souhaite
vulnerable we
ardemment
all
que
are.
cette quatrième
France
plateforme soit l'occasion de
truly
préparer
hopes that this fourth
l'intégration de cet
platform will help us
objectif
to
dans le prochain cadre
prepare
d'action de
our
Diogo
work
pour le
to achieve this
post-2015. Je
objective
vous remercie de votre
for
attention.
the 2015 goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I think we can definitely draw the symbolic and unifying nature of heritage to the public and to everyone who lives in it, and also as a resource that has to be integrated into resilience. You made reference to the need for political will to integrate heritage into disaster risk reduction. I wondered if you had any words of advice for people in the room who might be starting out on the process as to how best to secure that political will.
Sorry, I didn't understand your question.
How do you engage the political will? How do you get political support for projects such as this and resilience in heritage?
Eh bien, je crois que tous les États et toutes les organisations qui sont représentées ici et qui ont déjà acquis l'expérience de la construction de dispositifs institutionnels ou qui ont accumulé de l'expérience en matière de gestion et de prévention des risques. Et je me réfère à ce qu'a dit tout à l'heure Monsieur le gouverneur du Bhoutan. Il me semble que c'est un très très bon exemple de ce qui peut se faire au plan national. Il faut maintenant que toutes ces politiques nationales essaient de converger vers ce que j'appelais la construction d'une gouvernance nationale. Et pour cela, effectivement, il faut qu'il y ait une impulsion politique qui soit donnée, une volonté politique qui s'exprime de la part des États qui sont le plus directement engagés là-dessus, de façon à ce qu'on puisse créer un vrai réseau qui permette de prendre en compte ces enjeux stratégiques et ces problèmes au cadre international. Si vous voulez, je crois que les compétences techniques, elles existent. Les compétences techniques, elles existent. Le diagnostic commun, il existe. Mais il faut quelque chose qui cristallise tous ces éléments pour leur donner la dimension d'une vraie stratégie politique.
So that we can bring it to a higher dimension of a political
Next,
strategy.
we move on to Ms. Yasmin Lari, who is Executive Director of Pakistan's Heritage Foundation.
Thank you for inviting me to this session. It's very important.
Phone, please.
Thank you for inviting me to this session devoted to a very important theme, I think, that concerns all of us. My country today is confronted with enormous challenges, a vicious cycle of poverty and illiteracy, a porous border with Afghanistan driving militancy and violence, Taliban and drone attacks. It is also predicted to be one of the most vulnerable due to climate change. Thanks very much. Pakistan, as you might know, is a veritable treasure house of ancient heritage, sites and monuments spanning scores of centuries as home to 6,000-year-old Indus Valley civilization of Mehergarh and Mohenjo-daro fame. Its spectacular historic urban cores, depositories of age-old traditions that also encompass Alexander and Ashoka's Greco-Buddhist legacy of Takht-e-Bai and Taxila, the Sultanate Makli necropolis, scintillating Mughal jewels of the Lahore Fort and Shalimar Gardens, Ranjit Singh's impressive legacy, striking Hindu temples, and imposing British colonial heritage. It is a rich reservoir of intangible heritage and age-old value system, a land of mysticism and Sufi saints, steeped in folklore and ancient wisdom, enriched by devotional music and ecstatic dance, spreading one reality in the pursuit of peace, tolerance, and pluralism, regardless of religious orientation. While ageless arabesques embellish its tangible heritage, the women folk weave magical patterns in their crafts taught to them by their mothers and their mothers before them. Stimulated by oral history and time-tested reserves of local knowledge, they live in isolated rural habitat, sequestered from shining technology-ridden urban centers. It is these women and their children that suffer the brunt of recurring disasters. 73,000 lives lost and 600,000 houses that collapsed in the wake of earthquake 2005, while 800,000 families are today without shelter due to the great floods of 2010, 11, and 12. The flood victims have largely remained without help. Neither government nor international agencies, including the UN Shelter Cluster, being willing to consider the option of non-engineered structures drawn from vernacular heritage. Grateful that we are as a nation for the sympathy and aid received after the earthquake 2005, the extensive help provided by international banks and UN agencies who carried out commendable work, but their approach to reconstruction remains questionable, as its impact on climate change was entirely overlooked. Promoting steel prefabricated schools or use of burnt brick, cement, and steel for shelters on a vast scale cause massive carbon emissions and are also hugely disruptive interventions that destroy traditional living patterns and community cohesion, adding to greater vulnerability of communities. In the aftermath of 2010 floods, can we justify building 1,000 steel emergency shelters by UN agencies in post-conflict Swat, which reportedly required hacking of 25,000 poplar trees, or 100,000 shelters through the enforcement of burnt brick by the Shelter Cluster, which according to Magnus Wolf-Murray, DFID advisor in Pakistan, has caused 320,000 tons of carbon emissions and deforestation of 52,000 acres for 10 years. It is a source of pride that Pakistan government has received several prestigious awards for its post-earthquake reconstruction, and it was a remarkable feat to build over 400,000 expensive and, to my view, unsustainable houses and a large number of state-of-the-art concrete and steel buildings. Never mind that half of the school children from 5,000 collapsed schools are still in tents 7.5 years after the quake. That does not appear as if international approbation has been mistakenly provided to unwarranted heritage destruction and the denigration of local seismic-resistant vernacular that aptly fitted both the lifestyle and the mountainous terrain. Has tacit approval not been provided to excessive carbon emissions from concrete and steel structures where low carbon option was the norm? In the face of recurring disasters and donor fatigue having set in, how do we build self-reliance and resilience of communities except through technically improved, low-cost options derived from vernacular heritage, enabling them to enforce DRR-driven methodologies themselves? You'll see the top images are ones of brick, burnt brick, and steel girders and how they collapsed during the floods. And the lower part, the images are of DRR-driven local methodologies that we've devised. In the disturbing scenario, there is a glimmer. Due to research and experimentation based on vernacular heritage carried out by Heritage Foundation since 2005, adobe, mud, lime, and bamboo shelters designed with DRR-compliant technical interventions being built by UKAID IOM are zero ecological footprint. 24,000 shelters are nearing completion, out of which some 5,000 were successfully tested during 2012 floods. Reportedly, this is the largest unfired clay shelter program in the world, where not a single tree has been cut and the pride of women constructing them is clearly manifest. These communities then are on their path to discovery. You see the images on the lower part where you see all the decoration that's been carried out by women themselves. And as you heard from Giovanni, how important it is that culture should remain within our lives, continue to play the part as we go along. When we do not provide the masses with credible options, should we be surprised that they should escape from their flooded homes to seek refuge in World Heritage sites such as the Makli Necropolis? You can see the top image and how after 2010 floods, how many families just had to come in and squat there. This is a unique spiritual sanctuary that has suffered degradation and erosion due to increasingly aggressive weather. If the $20 million UNESCO Mohenjo-daro Fund established in 1973 has hardly touched the impoverished lives of surrounding villages, should we be surprised if our sites suffer degradation due to climate change as well as human pillaging? To counteract accelerated decay due to the impact of climate change, should not heritage, especially World Heritage sites, assume center stage as being eligible for massive help to enforce DRR-driven heritage safeguarding that is linked with poverty alleviation for cultural and economic resilience? My appeal to UNISDR is to launch, in collaboration with UNESCO, Save World Heritage Sites campaigns that could provide us with much-needed international expertise, capacity building, training, and livelihood programs. I bring you assurances from the custodians in Sindh and Sindh's Heritage Trust Fund that we will match all your efforts in order to save our priceless sites of Makli and Mohenjo-daro. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much for such a passionate presentation and a call for action, which is concrete, and for the commitment to match that action. I was wondering what it would take to change the current reconstruction mindset so that it takes into account the impact of climate change and local cultural and cultures and traditions at the same time? How do we work that? How do we get that through to people?
Well, Emily, you really like my wish list, won't you? Well, my dream is to replace the present culture of dependency, promoted by all of us, actually, with a culture of self-reliance, to bring back pride and ownership and resilience that would enable these communities to rise from adversity, not through handouts, but their own enterprise. I would like a strong message to go forth from this assembly to governments, INGOs, and NGOs to base their strategies on vernacular heritage and traditions rather than imposing their own glorified concept of what is good for the community. I could go on, but the most important aspect I have learned is to equip communities with technical skills. For example, to be able to reach out to thousands of villages in Pakistan, we need help to train an army of barefoot women entrepreneurs from within communities to ensure, you have to be on my side, then you have to come over, to ensure DRR compliance in building safer structures, fast-track functional literacy for women and children, food security and better diet through farming on roofs, and our roofs are very strong, 15 people can stand on them, water harvesting and biological treatment of grey water, soap making and hygiene training, agricultural waste composting, and a host of income-generating skills which they can market on their doorstep, however impoverished the community may be. These are all that we have tried, and I know that they work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, this leads us on to our final presentation now, which is Mr. Tim Badman, who's Director of IUCN's World Heritage Programme.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks to the organisers for this invitation. I'm here, I think, firstly to emphasise IUCN's support for the integration of heritage as a subject in DRR, but I think also to emphasise the relationships we see between natural heritage and cultural heritage, and to try to outline the approach we are seeking to take to natural heritage itself within that framework. If I can start by focusing on the big picture for our work on natural heritage, and particularly world heritage, which is not the words of the ISDR, but the words of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which we would see as a parent convention for a lot of work we do. And we've noted that in the Hyogo Framework for Action, damaged ecosystems, the impacts that has on human vulnerability has been noted as a key issue, that progress on that issue is seen as lagging. And here is a different convention, and I won't read the words on the slide, speaking to very much those issues in the mainstream of the strategic plan for biodiversity that's been agreed for the next 10 years to 2020. If I can try to make things then a little more specific to heritage, within the strategic plan for biodiversity, and there are a range of targets that have been set, the Aichi targets. Here is the one that perhaps sets the context for our work as IUCN on natural world heritage, which emphasised that as part of the mission of the CBD, there's a very ambitious target to protect 17% of land, 10% of marine areas in systems of protected areas, but that don't just provide protection, but that really do a whole range of other things, including the conservation of areas that are effectively and equitably managed, and areas that are integrated into wider landscapes and seascapes. So the message from this slide is this is going to be a very significant enterprise. It's going to touch a large part of the planet, and it's a significant opportunity for engagement. And for World Heritage, we see this challenge in the Convention on Biological Diversity in the first instance, giving us the challenge for what World Heritage sites should be and protected areas should be more generally, which is to show examples of how these tasks are achieved. And disaster risk reduction is an intrinsic part of that work. If I then just turn to the World Heritage Convention, as an instrument, it is an under-recognised instrument in terms of its performance for conservation. It just celebrated its 40th anniversary last year. For natural heritage, it provides international recognition and the task of protection for 217 natural sites that are recognised as places of outstanding universal value. But that's a very significant area. So within the 70% of the planet that is sought to be included in protected areas, the type of numbers we're dealing with natural world heritage sites is almost 10% of that total area. So it's a very significant area. It's a series of sites that are identified for their values. So these are irreplaceable areas that require protection. but they're areas that are vulnerable. And the message I would like to bring is they're also areas that need to be recognised for the services that they're providing. So not just for the conservation of nature in our instance, but the fact that the conservation of nature is part of conserving places that provide vital services to us as people. So it's a very significant enterprise. If I can then say this slide speaks only to natural sites. Those are the ones that IUCN deals with. But if you look at the totality of the World Heritage List, it's approaching 1,000 sites, natural and cultural sites. And if we look at IUCN's work on protected areas, in fact, many of the cultural landscapes that are recognized on the World Heritage List are protected areas, so designed for nature conservation as well as for the protection of heritage. So I guess my contention is that there's this really significant opportunity here to meet the challenge of scaling up. We're dealing here with 3 different international fora that I've mentioned in a few slides, the World Heritage Convention, the Convention on Biological Diversity, in this meeting of the international community that's focused on disaster risk reduction. And these places provide a real opportunity to show what joined-up action means on the ground. That's where things matter. That's where action's delivered. So we do have an opportunity to scale up. It's an opportunity that I think we've really not taken advantage of, and I would include IUCN in that comment. So we're just, at the moment, as IUCN, beginning some work, and the next few slides just give an illustration of the story we're trying to tell here, to look at the function of World Heritage areas within our work on protected areas to provide benefits to people and to provide services to people, and within those services to look at the role that they provide to providing resilient ecosystems and helping people prepare for and respond to disasters. So here's just one example of a site, one of the World Heritage areas, of work that's going on through one of the projects IUCN has to look at vulnerability, in this case vulnerabilities through risks of landslide, sediment runoff, soil degradation, and resulting risk to life in an area in Yunnan in China. In this instance, we have a project we're engaged in with a range of partners that's looking to solutions to some of those challenges and looking to approaches that are focused on understanding how this site functions as an ecosystem and within an ecosystem, and looking at the sorts of interventions that can work with nature to provide solutions. In this instance, the purpose of the slide is not to give you the detail, but is to draw out a couple of points. One is a focus on things that work with nature, in this instance working with the native plant species in the area that provide solutions to slope stability, and also the way in which people are choosing and the choices that are being made on agricultural production, but also with the concept that providing results for disaster risk is part of an approach focused on not just that benefit, but on multiple benefits. And a point I really want to draw out here is how important the relationship of nature and culture is in providing those sorts of solutions, because it really is understanding tradition, understanding cultural practice that provides many of the solutions, understanding the knowledge that communities have, the involvement of people in the governance of the area, which is really the key to durable solutions, and understanding that it's not just about the Cartesian world of the values of species, but also the way in which those support people's cultural practices and support their spiritual practices as well. I could talk about other examples, which I won't do, but just to note, we're trying through this whole process to really understand a whole range of other functions that World Heritage areas and protected areas and ecosystems provide to provide the solutions to disaster preparedness and disaster response. For instance, the way in which fire is managed, the way in which coastal wetlands provide resilience to damaging impacts of the sea, the impacts of alien invasive species. And my concluding messages are 3. Firstly, the importance to commit to heritage sites within your strategies. Firstly, because they are irreplaceable for their values, but secondly, because of the services they provide, and thirdly, because of the example they can provide, the tangible examples they can provide to what we're trying to say about practice. Secondly, as IUCN, that we see the approach of really understanding the ecosystem and how the ecosystem functions as critical, and not just for natural areas, but also for many types of problems we're dealing with. We were talking before this presentation about Venice, and in Venice we're dealing with an interaction between an incredible cultural place, but a whole range of natural pressures, which in a way is the interaction with the ecosystem. And lastly, the offer to collaborate, the offer to support, and the offer to engage with you to really try to make more joined up and better results on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that reminder that cultural heritage is not just about buildings and artifacts, it's about nature, it's about our surroundings, it's about our environment. One question which you did touch upon briefly, and again we've been discussing throughout, is were there any challenges in working with people, or were they very open and receptive to ideas, or did they feel that somebody was coming in and telling them how to change their livelihoods and so forth?
Well, I think every example is a different place, and with different people that live and work there. My own experiences before IUCN and this international job was on ground work in a coastal community in the UK, where we were dealing with issues of coastal erosion on a day in and day out basis. And I think it makes an enormous difference to solutions if you engage with the community first and really understand what their perception is of the issues. You won't get anywhere by descending with the solutions, clearly.
Thank you very much. Right, we're going to overrun slightly because we started slightly late, so I do apologise for that. And I'm going to throw questions to the floor, open questions from the floor in a minute. But first, I'd just like to ask Mr. Bacardi a question. What would be your advice to people who want to get involved and want to get to meet and engage with the various actors and organisations in DRR? If someone were just starting out completely fresh, how would you go about it? Who would you talk to?
Yes, well, as I said, in this room there are representatives of organizations that work on heritage and disaster risk reduction. The World Heritage Center is one. We have a website, but you can also reach us easily. And then ICOMOS, ICROM, and IUCN. So my first suggestion would be to sort of stay in the room and talk to us, and we can provide you a lot more information. But of course, we all have our own websites where all the information is available. And also another suggestion is to use the intergovernmental processes that exist. Tim Badman mentioned conventions, World Heritage Conventions, Biodiversity Conventions, and many others. 2003 UNESCO Convention on Intangible Heritage. All these forums provide opportunities where governments can play a role and interact and actually influence policies and actions, sometimes much more than we sitting in the secretariats can do.
Absolutely, thank you very much. Are there any questions? We'll start with you, sir. I think so. Sorry, wait, 1 minute. This gentleman here, please. Could you please tell us who you are and where you're from as well, please?
Thank you. My name is A.M. Jinadu. I'm from Nigeria. I have two questions here. The first one goes to the first presenter. I think he made a very important point that our cultural heritage are not only exposed to the risk of disaster, but that in the cost of reconstruction, that we do destroy the cultural heritage. I just want to know what you mean by this. Is it that by not building back this heritage in their original form? That is the first question. The second one goes to the presenter on Bhutan. Okay, he also made the point that we need to build cultural heritage resilience. And I think probably one of the options for building resilience is retrofitting. If we were to retrofit the cultural heritage, my question is that will they not lose their values, their cultural values? Thank you.
Do you want me? All right, thank you for the questions. What I refer to is when, for example, recovery plans are put together very quickly after a disaster by agencies that are in charge of course, humanitarian issues, and decisions are taken without consulting the people who are in charge of heritage. And as a result, for example, buildings which are historically significant are demolished because they are considered unsafe, simply because those who have done the assessment don't know them very well and don't understand that they could be relatively easily repaired. Other decisions that are culturally insensitive include also patterns of reconstructions. For example, I remember in Sri Lanka, after the tsunami of 2004, there was a proposal to move all the fishermen villages from the coast up inland and leave a sort of buffer zone of 1 kilometer. All the new reconstruction would have been, up there, which was completely sort of in contradiction with the traditional lifestyle of these communities that were linked to the sea. So I was just referring to decisions taken without taking into account the cultural dimension, and sometimes implying the loss of heritage, which is mistakenly considered as, hampering the reconstruction, whereas in fact it's where the reconstruction should start from.
Your second question was?
Thank you, gentleman from Nigeria. Now, by retrofitting, when we talk about retrofitting, I think we should assume it in two different dimensions. For example, a building like this, probably retrofitting would assume a different method. But in a cultural heritage context, for example, in Bhutan, after the 2011 earthquake, a lot of heritage sites were damaged. And now we're in the process of rebuilding or reconstructing them. But we generally do not dismantle the structure down. We try our best to preserve whatever is left. And we do not use cement and steel and nuts and bolts to retrofit. We use natural materials like timber supports, props, and then also, for example, in a temple, many of the frescoes are directly on the mud walls, so we cannot salvage them. Unlike if they are like paintings, we can take them off and then put them back. But when the frescoes are on the walls, it's very difficult. So in that context, we use whatever we can preserve. We use the local materials, wood, and then we don't use steel and all that in the cultural thing. Did I answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this gentleman over here?
My name is Horst Kremers from Berlin, Germany, and I'm missing a little bit of the topics indicated in the program, because in the description of this event it says natural and man-made hazards and so on. There's a lot of man-made hazards, threats to cultural heritage, as we all know, and I miss the discussion about that quite a lot. I don't want to talk of terms of war and riots and whatsoever, but it's definitely, as a man-made hazards, it's definitely an important question, and we all know that this happens in many of the countries represented here, and it's absolutely of big value for United Nations discussions. And I would be very unhappy if in the end of the resume of this conference here, there would be only the natural disasters mentioned. It's a big threat, and cultural heritage people have to be aware, and they have to be, they cannot prevent wars, but they have to take account that it would happen. It's a big risk, and we have to note it in the proceedings of this conference.
Right, please. Yes, Giovanni.
Yes, thank you so much for raising this very important point. In my presentation, I showed a couple of slides that related to human-induced disasters, a fire set by an arsonist, and then, of course, the Mostar Bridge, which was destroyed by bomb shelling, so war. And for lack of time, I couldn't show more of this, but you made a very important point. These are also disasters that have serious consequences. We have just seen Syria, Mali, also deliberate destruction of heritage. which is seen as a symbol of the enemy's identity, we consider that there is a lot that can be done to reduce risks related to this kind of events as well.
Is there anyone else from the panel who would like to add anything? No. Right, we are really pushed for time, so I'm going to take 2 more questions at the same time, and then I will ask the Mayor of Byblos to summarise and make a concluding remark.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I think today we are very happy to have this relevant meeting for the case of disaster reduction and disaster management. My concern is we all know that this is conservation heritage is a political issue, and I will ask a particular question to Mr. Jean Musitelli, which was ambassador at UNESCO for 5 years. How do you make those criteria to decide which assets has to be included in the World Heritage? Because I want to separate which is the science from the political aspect of World Heritage. For me, science should help people. But most of the time, when we choose to conserve a World Heritage, it's looked for me like a political struggle before than the science matter, which dealing with suffering of humanity. Thank you.
Oui, merci de votre question, monsieur.
Yes, well, thank you very much.
Je pense que les questions dont nous discutons aujourd'hui dépassent très largement le cadre de la problématique de la Convention du patrimoine mondial, culturel et naturel, même si elles en constituent d'une certaine manière le cœur, comme ça a été rappelé. Quand nous parlons du patrimoine comme outil de prévention et de gestion d'une stratégie de réduction des risques, nous nous référons à une approche beaucoup plus large et beaucoup plus globale du patrimoine. Ce n'est pas uniquement le grand patrimoine monumental, ce ne sont pas uniquement les grands sites universellement reconnus, les 217 qui sont inscrits sur la liste, comme l'a exprimé M. Badman, mais nous nous référons à une forme de patrimoine qui est l'environnement naturel, culturel, dans lequel vivent les populations. Et c'est de ce point de vue-là que le patrimoine est important. Vous avez vu beaucoup de diapositives où on montre des constructions, des modes d'habitat qui ne sont pas monumentaux, qui sont modestes, mais qui ont l'avantage d'être adaptés à ce que sont les circonstances locales. Donc, ce qu'il faut avoir à l'esprit, c'est que le patrimoine qui doit être pris en compte dans une stratégie de réduction des risques, c'est tout ce qui est l'environnement humain immédiat, mais pas seulement immédiat au sens physique, mais aussi, on l'a dit, au sens symbolique, puisqu'il y a la possibilité, à travers la reconstruction, de faire en sorte que les populations victimes des catastrophes ne se trouvent pas soudain coupées de leur patrimoine préexistant, tout simplement parce que, comme il a été dit, elles ont été transplantées ailleurs, ou encore parce qu'on les a relogées dans des constructions qui n'ont plus rien à voir avec celles qu'elles avaient auparavant. Donc, voilà, si vous voulez, mais bien entendu, l'expérience que l'on peut retirer de la gestion du patrimoine mondial et des sites qui sont inscrits est une expérience très enrichissante, parce qu'à travers la protection des sites inscrits, M. Badman l'a rappelé, ça va bien au-delà de ce qu'est la préservation de la nature. C'est aussi la prise en compte des services qui peuvent être rendus aux populations locales en la matière. Donc je crois que c'est dans cette optique-là qu'on doit essayer de bâtir une problématique qui permette effectivement de réintégrer ce patrimoine au sens large du terme dans une stratégie mondiale de réduction des risques contre les catastrophes naturelles.
Very much. There's going to be a question in Spanish now, so perhaps you'd put it.
Sí, buenos días.
Yes.
La pregunta para el señor del UNESCO.
Just a question from the gentleman from UNESCO. He spoke about certain aims around preserving culture and heritage linked to the relationship between heritage and the DRR platform.
poquito más?
Is it working? Yes, I can hear the speaker.
La pregunta, porque en
So
un quinto
the question,
objetivo usted se refirió a la coordinación
you spoke
entre el
about
Centro
aims
Patrimonio
relating to the
Mundial y
coordination
Plataforma de
between
Desastre.
the World
Ahora,
Heritage Centre and
¿cómo
the
podría
DRR platform?
compatibilizarse
So
con una cierta
I wondered
tendencia
how we could
de inflexibilidad frente a nociones tradicionales
ensure that we
de una
have
mínima intervención y
flexibility
o
in
reversibilidad?
terms of
En el caso de
prevention and
Chile, nosotros
resilience.
tenemos
In the case of
sitios
Chile, for
inscritos en el
example, we
patrimonio
have
mundial, me refiero a
a
esos sitios
UNESCO
que
site,
tienen
and
que
I'm
obedecer
thinking
a
of that
normas
site,
estrictas
which has
y a
very
veces la
strict
rigurosidad no
standards.
se compatibiliza con la
And
seguridad porque son sitios donde
there
vive
are
población. En
problems
el caso
because
concreto nuestro,
security is
un
not
perímetro del
necessarily
centro
easily
histórico de
integrated
Valparaíso.
into the idea of participation, and I wondered of the local population, and I wondered how you could reconcile those two aspects.
One very tiny last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Could you keep it very short?
Good evening. I'm Engineer Hussein from the Betra. I just want to raise a small suggestion that if we could collaborate or cooperate with the global cities or heritage cities, such like Byblos, when we attend a conference in Byblos in last October, and other cities who work in this region or in this field, we cooperate with them in terms of the cultural heritage protection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, if we could
so very
keep
quickly.
it very short. Brief, please. Thank you.
I think this flexibility should result from a dialogue between the authorities in charge of the site and the institutions that sort of govern the convention to find the appropriate compromise. I think this is possible, and we should start looking into specific case studies to build the knowledge that will help also other sites to face the similar challenges. There is absolutely no sort of expectation that you live in a risky situation to maintain the sort of heritage significance of the site where people live. On the contrary, I think you made a very good point, and we have to find the flexibility that you referred to.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry we have run out of time. We could have talked about this for much longer. There's obviously so many more things to be discussed. I will hand over to the Mayor of Byblos just for a very brief rounding off and a chairman's goodbye.
Thanks all. The discussion is very important. It should be only to start, and the start, to protect the cultural heritage in the world. Thank you very much.